Welcome, welcome, welcome. Had a little technical difficulty there. We are here Sunday morning, just afternoon. Happy New Year to SEC Focus and everybody that's going to be watching this. Wanted to get on here today. Obviously, we saw some fantastic matchups last night in the college football playoff between Ohio State and Georgia. Photo finishes in both. TCU, Michigan did not disappoint, setting us up for TCU versus Georgia. Not the matchup that anybody expected going into the preseason, I don't think, but here we are. I think maybe Georgia. But today, I want to focus on one team in particular, the team that I'm wearing, the Tennessee Volunteers, and I want to kind of recap a lot of their season and just go over it with where they were coming into the season and where they ended. I started looking back on it. If you're a Tennessee fan, obviously they've been through it. This is they're finished their season, 11 wins for the first time in 20 years since 2001. That thing ended a little unceremonious, so how it ended was pretty good. But I wanted to go over some of the preseason predictions from different outlets when it all came out. SEC Media Days, Bleacher Report. So Bleacher Report had Tennessee going 8-4, 5-3, second in the East behind Georgia. Respectable, right? College Football News, 8-4, 5-3, tied for third in the East behind Georgia, Florida, and tied with South Carolina. Yahoo Sports, 8-4, 5-3, tied for third. SEC Media Days actually had them third behind Georgia and Kentucky. CBS's Chip Patterson, he had them as the second most overrated team coming into the season. And a lot of the reasons that he mentioned were that they had come off of a 7-6 season, had a lot to grow, had another step to take. He didn't think they were ready to take it. So had them as the second most overrated team coming into the SEC season, only behind Texas A&M. So he did have that right. And southbound and down, they actually had Tennessee fifth in the East coming into the season. So as I kind of mentioned it, coming into the season, they were coming off of a 7-6 win. Didn't even win their bowl game last year. Josh Heupel in his second year coming into this year, they were 20-27 the previous four seasons before Heupel took over. So, and the reason I'm mentioning all these numbers is just because I think perspective is a big thing when you're talking about building a football program up from where they had been to where they are now. And if you look at it from a season standpoint, obviously, they come in the season, start off the year with a win against Ball State. Nobody was surprised by that. They go on the road in the Johnny Majors Classic, taking on Pittsburgh. And I think that what you saw there was a game they had lost last year, right, with Joe Milton kind of at the helm to start that game. But then Hendon Hooker comes in, come back, make that one a close one. Now they win this game in overtime, tough environment, tough, going on the road, beating Pitt. But get that dub. And then you got Akron, obviously 63-6. Nobody's surprised by that. And that sets you up for beating Florida. Now, if you're a Tennessee fan, you understand Tennessee just has not beaten Florida very often. One time they did it in 2016, but just doesn't happen very often. So you end up getting that win, and I think it was a little bit closer at the end than you wanted it to be. At the time, Florida had been coming off of they had beaten Utah at home. They had a little bit of momentum going. A lot of Tennessee fans did not go into that game with confidence, but get that dub, 38-33. And then the game that I don't think anybody really knew what to expect, they go on the road to Baton Rouge, take on the LSU Tigers. And I think this is the game that put Tennessee kind of on the national map. They go down to Baton Rouge, even though it's an 11 a.m. game, and just really take them to the woodshed. I mean, they dominate the game, get some turnovers, and really 40-13. So, that's a game. LSU had just been ranked. I mean, they were coming off of some good things. They had lost to Florida State, but they had, they were expected to do pretty well. Then you get a bye week, and you're going into Alabama. You haven't beaten Alabama in 15 years. It's at home. College game days coming to town for the second time. Had been there for Florida. So, there's a lot of buzz now. Now, both teams are, you're undefeated, but they haven't beaten, Alabama. If they come into the game, Tennessee is a 9.5-point underdog at home against Alabama. So everybody kind of knows the legend of that game. That was the Jalen Hyatt, the Hendon Hooker game. Jalen Hyatt with 5 touchdown catches that game, like 2 billion yards of receiving that game, 5 touchdowns. And it was Hendon Hooker, to me, that was his Heisman moment, getting the ball back with 15, 16 seconds, getting it within field goal range. Chase hitting the field goal, winning the game 52-49. That really puts Tennessee, on the track. Right now, you start talking about, can they be a threat? Can they get into the college football playoff, situation? Can they get there? And the answer was yes. At this point, you have to put them there because they've beaten LSU, they've beaten Florida, they've beaten Alabama, especially Alabama. So then you got UT Martin. Obviously, that they don't expect a whole lot there. They win that game 65-24. And then that sets them up for Kentucky. Now, Kentucky coming into the season was expected to compete for the East. I just mentioned some of this. They had a lot of outlets had them second in the East, maybe third. So that game is at home for Tennessee. And, Kentucky had beaten Tennessee in recent, not the previous year, but they had beaten them a little bit. And Kentucky's coming in with some confidence, have some NFL players. They got Will Levis. They got Chris Rodriguez. They got a defense that's, doing their thing pretty well. And Tennessee answers the bell again. They completely dominated Kentucky, end up winning that game 44-6, and it was the best to date, the best defensive performance I think that the Tennessee defense had put together. Moving Danico Slaughter to cornerback that game meant all the difference. And then you go on the road and you take on those Georgia Bulldogs. And, everything up into the season, you're number one in the college football playoffs in those first rankings. Georgia's not. And people are saying, well, they're the defending champs. And they showed why. They dominated Tennessee in a game that I think Tennessee the moment was too big. Let's just be honest. The moment got a little too big for them. They lose that game 27-13. And at this point now, you're not number one in the CFP anymore. And it would be really easy for them to start remembering that old feeling of now, oh, man, now we're not good enough to be there. But they bounce back. And they take on Missouri, a team that, had given Georgia all they wanted and had played well, had a good defense, and Tennessee answers that bell by winning 66-24. So great response. This is the first time we had seen them kind of face adversity after a loss, and it was a great response. Like Heupel and the crew got them, where they needed to be. Unfortunately, the very next week they go to take on South Carolina, and there wasn't a lot of buzz. People thought Tennessee was just going to absolutely steamroll. Are they going to get back into the CFP conversation? And things it was a disaster. I mean, they end up losing that game, obviously 63-38. And Hendon Hooker goes down with an ACL injury. Just a complete disaster. Couldn't have gone any worse, to be honest with you. But as it is, now you have two losses. You're pretty much out of the CFP conversation, so you think, and you got to still play another game. Obviously, Hendon Hooker's out, and you're going on the road to finish against a Vanderbilt team that is fighting for their bowl life, right? So, and the defense, everything was made after that South Carolina game. Does Josh Heupel have culture problems? Is Jeremy Banks and Joe Milton fighting in the locker room? And this was a response that I really wanted to see. Has Heupel, is the culture of this program changed, or is this same old, same old? Did they catch lightning in a bottle? And I think it was a resounding answer that we saw. We saw Josh Heupel go and take his team to Vanderbilt and win 56-0 and completely dominate that game. And they dominated in such a way. It's physical. They didn't just go out there. It wasn't run and gun. They pounded the ground. Joe Milton made some great throws. Defense played out of its mind, and it was a resounding answer yet again for, has Josh Heupel fixed the culture problems? So obviously now you're not in the college football playoff talk anymore. You're right there. Should you be above Alabama? Should you not be? To me, I thought they should have been ranked above Alabama, but at the end of the day, it didn't matter. Neither team was getting in. So then you get your bowl matchup, right? And you get to play Clemson, who South Carolina, ironically, had also beat and ruined their playoff chances. And as it goes on, Jalen Hyatt obviously opts out. Cedric Tillman opts out. Jeremy Banks opts out. Hendon Hooker's out with an injury. So I think everything was set up in this game. Clemson did have one opt-out on the defensive line, a pretty good player. But everything was set up for Clemson to win this game. They're the more experienced team. They have less opt-outs. They had the hot hand in the quarterback in Klubnik. Obviously, DJ had started all year, but he had just come off of Klubnik had just come off of a fantastic ACC championship performance. All the cards were against Tennessee again. They're going to play with some backups. And this was another chance for Josh Heupel to answer the bell in the national media. Has he built a program that can withstand? Are they next man up? Can they win no matter who's out there? Obviously, you want talent. And I think that what you saw it was shocking even to me, was that not only were they able to get the win, they dominated. They dominated Clemson 31-14. The defense gave up a lot of yards, but man, they were all over the place. Aaron Beasley led the charge, and Tennessee wins the game. And Josh Heupel with another resounding answer. So I say all that to say this: if you are a Tennessee fan, or even if you're a Tennessee hater, when you look at, is Tennessee back, they'll have to obviously compete and do this several years in a row for me to say that they're back. But are they back to relevancy? I think the answer is obviously yes. The way that they ended the year was, 11-2, beating Alabama, beating Florida, beating LSU, beating Clemson. They beat 3 of the last 4 national champions. And the way that Josh Heupel was able to, finish the recruiting season. He finishes, inside the top 10 in the country, 4th in the SEC in recruiting. I think that you have to get talent in there. You're behind Alabama, you're behind Georgia, you're behind LSU, but you're ahead of teams like Kentucky. You're ahead of teams like Florida. You're ahead of teams like South Carolina that you're competing directly against. So now the answer moves to, has Josh Heupel in 2 years, what he's done has been remarkable, but can he sustain this? And I think that what you saw with all the guys being out, and Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman and Hendon Hooker and Jeremy Banks, is that I don't think there's going to be a drop-off. I think the expectations coming into next year will be just as high, if not higher. They won't be probably picked to finish 3rd, 4th, and 5th in the East. They'll probably be picked to finish 2nd. I think that Georgia is going to be the top dog unless they get knocked off. And that's going to be the goal, right? The goal is to take a step forward, not a step backwards. Huge leap this year, going from 7-6, losing your bowl, to 11-2, at one time being ranked number 1. And a lot of people are going to point out that they had a chance and blew it against, Georgia, and then again against South Carolina. To those people, I'll just say this: you got to remember back to just 2 years ago and what I said. They were 20-27 the previous 4 years before Josh Heupel got there. So for him to come in and immediately grab a winning season, and then the very next year have him a 10-win regular season, and to cap that off with a resounding 17-point win against Clemson in the Orange Bowl, you just can't say enough about the job that him and his staff have done. So I think that next year you could seriously be talking about Tennessee being a contender for the SEC East. And I think that they've put the world on notice. Josh Heupel specifically has put the world on notice that he can recruit. Just going back through in 2020, talking about recruiting, this was actually they were 11th overall, 7th in the SEC. 2021, 22nd overall, 8th in the SEC in recruiting. 2022, 17th overall, 7th in the SEC in recruiting. And then capitalizing on this year, 9th overall, 4th in the SEC in recruiting. Obviously, a huge piece of that is Nico coming in. Supposedly he's going to be the quarterback of the future. I think everything that I've seen, he's already practicing with the team. And I think that was another huge thing for Josh Heupel as he's building this program, is that he was able to get a lot of his recruiting class as early enrollees. They had this entire month to practice with the team, including Nico, working with Joe, being around Hendon Hooker. And that's another thing I want to mention. Hendon Hooker obviously had the ACL surgery, flew back, was at the Orange Bowl, had zoomed in, the last week while he was on the table getting ACL surgery. He's still zooming into quarterback meetings. So those are the kind of players that change your program and sustain things for you. Obviously, it starts at the top with Josh Heupel. It starts with the coaching staff and the recruiting, but having guys like Hendon Hooker, having guys like Joe Milton, the MVP of the Orange Bowl, having guys, like Jabari Small, Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman, all those guys, those are program-changing dudes. And I think that when you look back at this 2, 3, 4 years from now, this team this year is going to be the team that started it all. For me, if I'm a Tennessee fan, obviously disappointing the way that they weren't able to be in the top 4. But if you really take a step back and look at the big picture, what a season it was for Tennessee and Josh Heupel, for Hendon Hooker. And I'm just excited to see what's going to come next. I think by all accounts, Joe Milton is going to be the quarterback that starts next year. Nico is going to be there learning under him. And who knows? We've seen Joe Milton start as the starter and then lose that job due to injury to Hendon Hooker. So who knows if the same thing could happen. But I think if you're a Tennessee fan, You feel comfortable about where you are. You feel like you finally made the right hire. Tennessee finally made the right hire after so many bad coaching decisions, obviously. So just wanted to get on here, have a little quick Tennessee session. And for SEC Jeezy and the SEC Focus podcast page, by the way, share the page, like the page, share it with your mama, share the podcast. And if you want to hear more content, stay tuned. For SEC Jeezy, I'm out.